Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining our Race Today podcast. Our Race Today podcast is a 1-hour talk show about racism in the United States, as well as an activist platform to eradicate racism across the United States. I'm Dr. Alicia Williams, one of the co-producers of our Race Today podcast, and I also have here my colleague and co-producer, Lisa Tavallo.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Dr. Alicia Williams and I began this show about 1.5 years ago in response to George Floyd's murder. And we wanted to have this conversation about current issues of racism in America and also discuss activism. How can we improve the situation by all of our listeners listening to your suggestions?
Thank you so much, Lisa. And with that, I'd like to begin today's conversation with introductions. And today we will be talking about colorism in our society. First, I'd like to introduce our first panelist, Spencer Simpson.
Hello, thank you, Alicia and Lisa, for having me. My name is Spencer Simpson. I'm a writer, comedian. I've done nonprofit work for about 10 years now, and I'm super happy to be here.
Thank you. Nice to have you, Spencer. Next, we have Judy Ann McKenzie.
Hi, thanks so much, Alicia, and your co-producer for having me on the show. My name is Judy Ann McKenzie. I am an executive leader. I've worked in corporate industries 15 plus years as a HR executive as well as a consultant. So I have worked with organizations on a global scale and very happy to participate today.
Thank you so much, Judy Ann. Next, we have Dr. Gerald Hill.
Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm a physician in private practice now for 20 years and actively involved in the community, married with 2 sons, 23 and 24. And it's a pleasure to be here. It's not too often you get to talk about colorism and race issues here in our wonderful country. Thank you.
Great to have you, Dr. Hill. Thank you. Next, we have Dr. Ozuji.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Chinyere Osuji. I am a visiting associate professor in African American Studies at the University of Maryland, College Park. I do research on race and the family, immigration, and I wrote this lovely book called Boundaries of Love, Interracial Marriage, and the Meaning of Race that compares interracial couples in Brazil and the United States. I'm a sociologist by training, and I'm very happy to be here.
Great to have you as well. Next, we have Cherie McCain.
Hi, Alicia and Lisa. Thank you for having me. My name is Cherie McCain. I am an actress, writer, producer, and I have been in the industry for I'm gonna say about 16 years. So I seen and witnessed colorism, and I'm glad to be a part of this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Cherie. And with that, I'll hand it over to our moderator for today's conversation, C.R. Gibbs.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is a general question. I'd like to begin with asking you, in your own words, how do you define colorism? And that's for each of you. Who wants to jump in the pool first?
I'll go ahead and start.
Okay.
I would describe and define colorism as discrimination against someone based on the color of their skin, whether different shades of darkness, to be more specific.
Wonderful. Thank you.
So I will add to that it's not just the different discrimination against someone because of the color of their skin and the different shades of darkness, but also based on their ethnicity.
Okay. Anyone else?
So when I think about colorism, I think again about either prejudice or discrimination on the basis of a person's phenotype, but specifically the color of their skin. Because we know there's lots of different types of discrimination that can come with your physical characteristics, but it's specifically about that valuing lighter skin tones in comparison to darker skin tones. I think this is a specific remnant of white supremacy and its creation, not to be confused with earlier forms of like skin color preferences that might have existed in the world. This is something that's new, that's come about through white supremacy and through the enslavement of Africans.
Thank you. Thank you. Volunteers? Anyone else? For some reason, I think we might not have everyone, but let us move on. Are there any positive implications of colorism in your industry? Is there any positive connotations? And if you
I
can think
think
of one or two, we'd appreciate it. Yes, please.
this Cherie, I would say it's positive colorism in my field, which is the entertainment industry, because you do have African American actors who are breaking barriers and breaking stereotypes in each role that they play. So that to me shows that the industry is somewhat moving along in a positive way. Even though you still see colorism, but it still has, a problem with it especially when it comes to TV and film.
Okay. Cherie, we're gonna spend some time together in terms of the questions, but I'd also like to hear from anyone else. And again, now the question is, how has colorism impacted you personally? Again, a general question, open to you all.
I know for me speaking, colorism is a interesting thing in which, because of speaking particularly how it relates to phenotype and features, I've always been sort of at the intersections of groups I'm in which, oh, I'm Black, but not really Black. So around non-Black people, there's a level of comfort that has allowed me to peek into their psyche, but also the victim of racism, or like more immediate racism, in which like they'll touch my hair without consent. I'm basically their front line for all their Black questions, and sort of like, oh, do y'all really say no cap? Like, what's that like? So it's been very interesting to sort of pierce beyond the veil, if you will, and see how non-Black people look at us, and how, because I'm light, it's sort of disarming and allows them to really let their guard down and really ask questions they've always wanted to know from Black people, but we're too afraid because it's deemed, impolite, and because generally the questions are usually racist.
Thank you, Brother Spencer. Anyone?
Well, I have a comment, but it really, my opinion, for me personally, colorism in the sciences really hasn't had a huge effect on me, because so much more in the sciences is based off of objectivity and takes a lot of that subjectivity out. So as I think about some of these questions, the truth is, for me, from a science standpoint, and me being in private practice, having my own business, not having to go out into the world looking for employment, I haven't had to deal with it too often, but I have seen it in other industries.
Okay.
For me, when I think about colorism, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say that for me, when I think about colorism, I would never say that there's like a positive side to colorism. I think it would be like the equivalent of saying, asking like, what are the good things about racism, right? It's like, well, if we value things like justice and human beings and valuing people's worth not based on the literal color of their skin, and there really isn't an upside to colorism, and it's really something that needs to be eradicated. But as far as me personally, I think that as a woman, we experience that intersectional component of colorism where it's even more important for us to be beautiful, right? However that's defined. And so living in a society that is colorist means that your beauty is tied to the lightness of your skin, particularly if you're African American or you're Black, or if you're a Latina, etc., right? And so when I think about in my career, as a sociologist, if you look at like most of the prestigious sociology departments, and maybe even like AFAM departments, you'll see that like a lot of the women will tend to be people of a lighter hue. And so I'll give you guys, you guys can do that research if you'd like. So it's something that definitely is noted in my discipline, and it's something that is important if we're thinking about ending inequality.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Osuji. Cherie, here we are, and I want to address several questions to you. You touched earlier on you've seen colorism in the entertainment industry. Can you expand on that? You approached it, Ms. Cherie, at when we began and when my previous question, but can you expand on that at all?
Basically, what I've seen in colorism in the industry is like you could take like certain shows, like for example, a show Gossip Girl. It was originally a all white cast, and
Mhm.
you know, this was during my time, but now during this generation, because diversity is important in the industry, they add maybe uh one or two African American cast members a part of it, but at the same time they're not dark skinned, like they're light skinned. So they still have light skin. They make them, fit in perfect with the preppies. And you would never see a dark skinned African American person like on the show like Gossip Girl. So I think sometimes when it comes to the industry and you see roles in certain shows, you won't see a dark skinned actor on a particular show. But
Mhm.
if you go on like maybe like I would say like Grey's Anatomy, who is a very diverse cast, from their first season to their season 18, you have seen dark skinned African American actors that have natural hair, or just you barely see a person on it that have a wig. So it's like they have different types on the show. But yes, that's what I've seen about colorism in the industry.
Well, is that since you mentioned that particular show, is that due to Sandra Rhimes?
Yeah, with Grey's Anatomy, I that's definitely has to do with Shonda Rhimes. Like she embraces, anybody who has, natural hair, or I know it's tests that I've been on, like TV shows that I've been on, and they want you to have natural hair now. So whether you're a light skinned actor or a dark skinned actor, so it's like it all depends on the director and all depends on the creator of the show.
So we're looking at colorism, a link between colorism and casting. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Are there any other aspects of TV or motion picture production where colorism might come into play?
Um, I think it's mainly just dealing with like the casting part of the casting aspect of it, because it all
Mhm.
goes to what that producer wants on the show or what that network wants on the show. So they may not want a darker um actress to play in this particular environment. They may want a light skinned version of it only.
Is there a way to, and I'm going to broaden the aspect, the arena of the question, but as it relates to entertainment casting, what do you do as an actor if you how do you fight that? Is there a way to fight it short of bleaching your own skin? Is there a way to deal with that at all institutionally inside the industry?
I know some actors they bleach their skin, or they make their hair a certain color. They make it a little lighter, or instead of having it dark, just to fit in with the show. Um, it's kind of hard to break colorism. Depends on, it's not too hard, but it is a little hard to break colorism in the industry because it just all depends on um again, it goes back to the director and it goes back to the studios. some studios may be stuck on that old Hollywood instead of that new Hollywood. So it's like, if you too dark, they won't hire you. Let's look at the cast from Living Single. When you look at Living Single, you saw that Maxine, she was dark skinned, but she played a lawyer. But then you saw Regine, she played a whole different character, but they always had that one preppy friend. So they had different shades on that show, whether they was light skinned or dark skinned. But everybody who plays on that show that was either light skinned or dark skinned, they had a particular role, job type that they played, like the lawyer or the entrepreneur or just anything. So when it goes to colorism in the entertainment industry, it goes off of, what is that actor, what is that character, background.
Gotcha. So colorism then impacts casting. It impacts how African-American actors get particular roles, and it impacts representation in the industry. Would you agree with those?
Yes, I agree that it represents a lot of representation in the industry, because especially if I would say how you want to be portrayed. And if you have an agent that is only putting you in for certain roles, or a manager that's only putting you in for certain roles or certain shows, and it's like, say for example, you grew up in the hood, but they won't never put you in that type of show because they know what your skin color is and what you can play. So they may not know your whole background. You may fit the show because you grew up in the hood or something, but to them in Hollywood, they have to think about who is going to sell the show more, and they may just go ahead and put like a light-skinned actor in that particular role.
Yeah, it's always been amazing to me how many Black actors, having gotten on the show, automatically have to have, more so back in the day than now, some sort of criminal background. They have to have that street cred, or somehow or another in the minds of the casting directors, they're not really, well, frankly, not really that Black. But I appreciate your comments. Judy Ann, how are you today?
So I'm doing well. I wanted to comment on the question
Sure.
I had before in terms of impact. So as someone applying for an opportunity, could be passed over for lighter skin African American, or could be passed over for the lighter skin Indian person with the long hair, or Spanish person with the lighter skin for a role or for a position. And I wouldn't have even thought of wearing my hair natural in order to be able to go for an interview. And one particular time, my hair is short now, but at one point it was much longer. Someone had the audacity to comment about the fact that my hair was long and so shiny, and I know they meant it in a nice way, but the mere fact that they commented about it, or they commented about my accent, oh, we love your accent, led me to believe, did they think because I am articulate is why I might be better than somebody else? Or is it because of my skills and credentials and what I bring to the position? So, and I would tell you, I have seen people who have come in with dreads when dreads was not popular back in the day, or twist or locks, and they would be passed over for the opportunity. And when you ask, okay, so why isn't this person qualified? the comment that would be made is, well, they're not dressed professionally. Well, what does that mean?
Wow.
So that has been my experience. I've seen it. I've seen it happen. I've known of people when I know of one individual, she has dreads and it's all wrapped up in a nice bun. You wouldn't know it, so it looks like a particular style. Going before, if there was a meeting with individuals in order to be able to pitch. I've known folks who had extensions in their hair be told that doesn't look professional in the workplace because it's a financial environment. So I've seen the spectrum. I would say it's getting better as everyone now is wearing more natural hair. Extensions or braids are more acceptable. I've seen people are more open towards actually interviewing and hiring those individuals. But it also is funny because they might be lighter in complexion versus the darkest skinned person who has dreads or the darkest skinned person who may be wearing braids.
So what are the legal ramifications for when colorism shows up in the practices of an organization? What options do you have?
So the only option available right now is claiming hostile work environment from a discrimination perspective, because the courts are behind the times. If you look at, I believe it's Batson versus Kentucky, it had to do with the fact that jurors were excluded from a case because they were dark. And that particular case has moved forward to present day where people are looking at it, but the courts right now on the docket only sees discrimination based on race, meaning white or black, versus different levels of skin color. So it's very difficult to be able to get traction if you are discriminated against based on skin color. You might be able to get some traction based on the fact that you feel it's creating a hostile work environment for you and that you might be stressed. You're prevented from being promoted. You're prevented from being mentored. You're prevented, it's impacting your pay. So things like unequal pay or a hostile work environment might be easier to prove than going into a court of law right now, because the laws need to be changed based on the color of your skin.
Thank you. Brother Spencer, what do you see as the relationship between colorism and capitalism?
It's a great question. To me, well, for right off the bat, capitalism is a political and economic structure in which private ownership is paramount. And so intrinsic to that is the creation of, groups of people that have the same shared material and social interests, or classes, if you will. So in my mind, capitalism and colorism have this unique relationship wherein within ethnic groups, it creates a class, if you will, of people who aspire to acquire more and to try to get as close as they can to whiteness. Because ultimately, colorism, as Dr. Ozuji beautifully introduced as well, it is a remnant of white supremacy dependent on your proximity to whiteness. So in my mind, by getting people of color rather to buy, skin lightening creams, bleach their hair, very much do whatever they can to contribute to the economy in pursuit of appearing lighter and trying to appear as a person who is, of a better class, that they fuel each other, because capitalism teaches you that the individual is the most powerful thing, and therefore you have to invest in the individual solutions are the means in which you can survive. Colorism teaches you that lighter skinned individuals are better. Therefore, to be your best self, you must buy into literally the idea that being lighter as well, but also do whatever you can monetarily and financially to continue to pursue that class.
Can this alienate us from each other? In other words, doesn't this create a constant tension in our community that does not serve the interest of the community?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think its primary function is, again, to create, more foot soldiers within ethnic groups for white supremacy. Because if we are spending so much time, instead of embracing the beautiful gradient of colors that we have, if we're spending so much time even just dismantling this hierarchy that's been imposed on us, where we're taking time from, investing in ourselves, building up our own Black practices, contributing to our own communities, because we're spending so much time getting people to understand that regardless of our features and, our skin, it's all, race is all socially constructed. These colors have been socially constructed and forced upon us. So we're spending so much time undoing the work when we should be building. And I think that's another function of capitalism as well. It keeps us buying into it as opposed to building an alternative.
That sounds like an exhaustive process, man. I mean, constantly having to deal with all of this and obviously engendering all sorts of pain. What do we do to make ourselves feel better about it?
I think that it's this dialogues like these are essential. I think it's the first step. I think all of us, have a duty to really interrogate the ways in which we've been raised in this society, honestly, regardless, relating to gender, race, sexuality, all of that, very much coming to terms with understanding how the world has been built and how the way, for the most part, especially for Black people, the world has not been built to serve us. It has not been built to encourage us and empower us. Therefore, it's what do it's upon us to come to terms with the ways in which we're being held back and come up with solutions as our community. Because at the end of the day, we're the only people who are going to, we can only lift ourselves. It's on us to make ourselves better. Representation is great, but it may not always lead to liberation or even transformation, for example. So very much like, especially in Hollywood, we've had this, the Oscars so white, there's been a lot of attention on the Black representation in media, both in front of the camera and behind the camera, but it's still very, nominal. Look at like the Oscar nominees, and very few of them are actually Black or of color. So it's very much like we have to focus on ourselves and the ways in which we can come together and build up the ways, embrace Blackness as it is and its all multitudes, firstly, and whatever that looks like. I think that's the biggest and most surefire solution, is very much, really loving Blackness in all its forms and committing to that in everything. Like if you're making a film, think about perhaps casting people of darker skin, differently abled, very much committing to, I want all Black people to feel seen, regardless of color, skin tone, hair texture, etc.
Thank you. Dr. Osuji, how does colorism affect the family dynamic?
So I think there's a variety of ways that it affects family dynamics. First of all, there's a scholar, Ellis Monk, out of Harvard, and he's done a lot of work on skin color stratification in the United States and in Brazil. But thinking about the United States specifically, what he's shown is that for women among African American women, a lighter skin tone isn't related to whether or not you will get married, right? There's no skin color effect for getting married. What he does find is that women who are lighter skinned have an increased likelihood of marrying a higher status spouse, in this case, husbands. These were hetero couples. And so when we think about the family, we know, according to his work and also work by Margaret Hunter and other scholars, we see that light skin for women can give them an asset when it comes to marriage markets, and as far as finding a marriageable man or a marriageable husband, right? But there's also been some research from the Fragile Families data set, which recently, maybe in the last 10 years or 15 years, has started incorporating skin color and skin tone into the data set. And one thing that they found is that when you look within families, skin color, having a darker skin tone among siblings who presumably have a similar same family background, that a darker child will be at a greater likelihood for hypertension. And of course, this is, of course, hypertension is bad, right? We don't want, these situations to happen. But even just thinking intergenerationally, right, that these things can be cumulative. If, for example, as we know, like at the beginning of the 20th century and even earlier, that there was a premium for lighter skin, in which there are many circles, blue vein societies, for example, or churches and other civic organizations in which your skin tone played a factor into whether or not you could be a member. And so this can create a stratification system in which lighter people are marrying lighter people and darker people are marrying darker people, so that over generations, there can be either an increase or a maintenance of skin color, of colorism within the Black community. So I think this is also something to think about, both intra-family dynamics as well as cross-family dynamics.
Thank you. And I'd like to open this up to the rest of our panelists. Can any of you share your perspectives or personal experience on how colorism has affected the family dynamic? Anyone else?
I would just kind of echo what's being said. I think from a young age, young people are getting messaging that speaks to the power and the skin tone issue, and that manifests in so many different ways as they progress through life. What comes to mind is the child in that family who might be of a lighter skin tone, who over time begins to feel different and better because of all the messaging she has received, not just at home, but in the classroom and all of her walks of life. And it's interesting because I think depending upon what part of the country you're from, depending upon too what you're talking about at your kitchen table, kids are going to be empowered to identify and not be as affected by this. As I speak to you now, I'm sitting in the DMV area in a county that has 3 of the most diverse communities in the whole country. And we're kind of used to dealing with these issues and more educated, not to mention I sit in the backyard of the federal government too, where I think a lot of these laws have made life a little different in this particular area of the country. But I do believe with this issue, it does manifest in a variety of different ways in the family.
Yes, sir. Anyone else?
So
let's talk to, I'm sorry, go ahead.
In my personal experience, I spend a lot of time with young people, right? I'm both an educator and also on social media way more than I ought to be. And I've seen that younger people tend to be more overt about calling out colorism, especially young women, Black women specifically. I see them having more conversations over social media, trying to call out colorism, but also figuring out ways to solve the problem of colorism in our communities.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. The impact of colorism on interracial relationships and indeed on biracial families. Dr. Osuji, would you share your perspective on that?
No, I will not. I'm just kidding. Adding a little bit of levity there. In my book, Boundaries of Love, Interracial Marriage and the Meaning of Race, I ended up doing interviews, over 100 interviews with people in Black-white couples. So I interviewed husbands, I interviewed wives separately, Black men with white women, Black women with white men. And one of the dynamics I found was that both in Brazil and LA, there couples involving Black women with white men tend to experience less hostility than couples involving Black men with white women. And of course, we know that in the United States, there's this history of antagonism towards Black men being romantically involved with white women, or even like the pretense of it, where like Black men were literally killed, lynched for any semblance of that type of relationship. But one of the things that I found was also interesting was that many of the Black women talked about how people couldn't tell that they were a Black-white couple, that they were often looked more racially ambiguous. Often when I interviewed them, they were women who had like lighter skin. And this is not to say that all the women who I interviewed looked like this, but some of the women who I interviewed had lighter skin, didn't see themselves as biracial, even if they had like an ancestor that was not Black. But it seemed as though color was coloring their experiences of what it meant to be a Black-white couple, is particularly in the Los Angeles sample.
Anyone else? It's got perspectives on interracial relationships and the impact of colorism, or the impact of colorism on the children of biracial families. Anyone else?
Oh, I should also add that
Yes.
There's been some research on Black biracials, and of course, skin color is a large part of their interactions with other people, in which people see them as belonging to the Black community or contesting that, or how people are labeling them. And also, I think Kirian Rockamore and David Brunsma have written extensively about how they look, their skin color plays a role in how they identify as biracial. There's not just like one biracial identity, right? You can have like a biracial identity where you see yourself as like equally one thing and the other thing, or you might see yourself as like beyond race, like I'm just human, or you could see yourself as like a Black biracial, right? So there's lots of things involved in this thing we call a biracial identity, that in which skin color is a factor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, for me, my whole life, it's been clear. The lighter you are, the prettier you are, the better you are. If you had a choice, generally speaking, between a dark-skinned girl or a light-skinned girl, that light-skinned girl was always prettier. I will say that we're at a different point in our lives now, in our country, I believe, where we don't see it that way like we used to. And whenever you had the mixed child who was lighter, that child was always thought to be prettier and better. I feel like our entertainment industry, I feel like our society is aware of this, and we're beginning to see a shift right here with our HBCUs, with our new vice president. I feel like there's a movement moving in the right direction right now, but generally speaking, lighter has always been perceived as better.
Well, Dr. Hill, how does that impact you? And you touched on this earlier, the colorism in the medical profession. And can you specify a particular impact of colorism on the patients that you've seen?
I think, generally speaking, the same issue translates into our healthcare system, that the initial comfort level, especially when you're talking about our wider population, majority population, for them, they're going to be more comfortable, the lighter skinned, and the more characteristics they see in that person that they can identify with. But as a whole, I still believe that most people, when you deal with the objectivity of the doctor-patient relationship and the healthcare system, you're going to want somebody who can get the job done. But all the things outside of that, be it the marketing people, be it your front-facing staffing, we all know that historically those people are going to have those characteristics that are more, I'm going to say softer, more acceptable by our society because of the connection between comfort the economics and the business model that is trying to be implemented as well. I will say that me, for example, the thing that comes to mind most is I deal a lot with marketing companies coming to my office, and most of them are all fit a certain description. And when a person of color comes through there, they're almost always going to be of a lighter skin tone for the reasons we're talking about here. Because again, I live in the DMV area, most of my patients are African American, and if they're not, they don't have a problem with these kind of issues, because you get to a point in life, I think, for some of us where we can see beyond all this stuff. Me, I've been in colleges and medical school classrooms with hundreds of people, and you get to a point where you cannot go through your daily life thinking about these things all the time, and you have to focus more on a level of hopeful objectivity, and you see people for who they are. That's a huge burden to carry every single second, if not day of your life.
Thank you. Thank you. Panelists, how about your own reactions in terms of colorism, either in your family, in your personal daily life, or in what you love to do? And if you could wave a wand, how would you change things? This is open to all of the panelists.
I think I mean, I will make a quick comment. I think for the entertainment industry, how I would change it, it shouldn't matter what color your skin is, whether you dark skin or light brown. I think it should matter for your talents, and I think that sometimes these directors or writers, they shouldn't write a certain way just to fit in to fit a certain actor in that particular role. Or I think they should be more aggressive when they go into these meetings. I know sometimes it's like a game, but that you got to play. But it's just they should be more aggressive and be able to speak up and say, "Hey, it doesn't matter if it's a light skinned or a dark skinned actor. This person can act the African American." So I think they should go off the ethnicity more than just if it's a dark or brown actor. So I think they should just throw colorism out the industry, and because everybody's background is different.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would just say that it's kind of interesting too, because a lot of the characteristics that are thought to be inferior by society now, at the same time, people are looking for those characteristics. You have people going to a plastic surgeon to get bigger lips. You have people going to work on skin tones too. So I think at the end of the day, you got to do what you believe in. And when you see a problem, you can't be afraid to have dialogue, to address it, and when appropriate, use laws to help guide and change behaviors. But more importantly, our young people have got to get to a point where they're educated on these issues. And when they are, I don't think they become such a burden to deal with every single day.
Thank you. Dr. Osuji, I'd like to ask you about, for lack of a better label, international colorism. And what I mean by that is the persistence of colorism in societies that may not be entirely African descended.
Well, I was actually going to respond to the previous question, which is related to
Please
this.
go ahead.
Yeah, so like some of you guys can tell from my name, I'm a Nigerian American. My parents were born in Nigeria. I'm Igbo. We're Igbo. And in our community, it was understood that lighter skin was better. And I remember growing up going to African stores with my mom and like her trying to figure out what was the best skin bleaching cream to use. I think this is really common among many communities in which a lot of women are physically altering their bodies, and men too, right? But one thing that struck me recently was I was looking for something, like looking at like skin lotions on Amazon. And I remember seeing that there were people who were taking pills, like the skin lightening,
Yes.
industry has gone way beyond the creams. Now they're like pills that you can take, other, I guess, means, medical procedures that people can undergo in order to achieve a lighter complexion. So I know that we often think about bleaching creams, right? But I think that that whole world has shifted. And also there's nicer ways to talk about lightening your skin, right? You can say brightening, right? As opposed to lightening it, but still achieving the same effects. I remember looking at at a pill that people were taking, and I was like, this does not look safe. And looking at the reviews and seeing people talk about like how, including several Black women, talking about showing before and after pictures and talking about how it really brightened their skin, how they're so happy with the results. And I was like, oh, this is what we're doing these days, But you asked also about like what we do in our free time, and I am somebody who loves a Korean drama. Don't ask me why. But COVID got me doing all sorts of things I never did before. So I've been watching a lot of Korean dramas and come to realize, oh wow, these people want to be as white as possible. Like you see somebody who was acting in 2000 and you look at them again in like 2020 and you're like, oh, they're a completely different color, So we know that bleaching creams, products, skin lightening products are a global phenomenon. And as Spencer was pointing out earlier, there's a lot of capitalist investment in telling us that our skin color is not good just as it is. And people make billions of dollars in selling us products to make us purchase them so that they can get wealthy off of us, off of our insecurities and off of our colorism and white supremacist society. So if we think about white supremacy as not just being a Western hemispheric or an America's thing, but being global, then colorism becomes really a global issue. I'll end my plane there.
I remember that when we talk about the disastrous effects of colonialism, European colonialism particularly, we sometimes forget that attitudes and issues were brought to nations of color and people of color because of European colonialism. But at the same time, people have looked at the impact of it, particularly in the United States. In the 1960s, there was a historian called Winthrop Jordan, and he wrote a book called White Over Black. And he got into what he thought were the reasons for so much anti-Black hatred by whites in the United States, only to find out that he didn't have it as well as he thought it. He had to go back and change it. And he was headed toward a place where many historians are now, which is that when we look at the roots of it, we have to go back into almost inchoate attitudes in the European society, particularly as far back as the medieval period, as well as the Regency period. There is just wanted to share this with you, a young author named Ayanna Thompson has looked at the history of blackface, which we assumed was an American phenomena, only to find out that we can trace its roots back to Europe. And in terms of what Winthrop Jordan found, there appears to be something already existing inside the minds of Europe, Stuart era and Elizabethan era English people that was already anti-Black. So in other words, it wasn't the question of them meeting us as slaves, which had been a convenient go-to experience or excuse, but that many Englishmen coming across the ocean already had it inside them when they met us. So that we were operating from a deficit because of European and again, particularly English attitudes toward color, attaching it to filth, attaching it to unbridled sexuality. So in many respects, we never had a chance to meet these people on even ground because they had already cooked the books, to mix metaphors, before they ever stepped off at Jamestown or any place else. And so when we look at the beginnings of colorism, when we look at the beginnings of racism, I wanted to leave you with one thing as we head toward the close. Sometimes young people, they know it exists, but they won't really believe it. So I just wanted to share with you something that if you want to look it up yourself, it's on mountvernon.org, mountvernon.org. Yeah, that's the Mount Vernon with George Washington. And this is what they had to say. They said, Washington paid close attention to the appearance of enslaved house servants, including their skin color. Like many slave owners, Washington considered enslaved people with lighter skin as more desirable for household work where they were highly visible. And then they have a quote from a French visitor who says, the general's house servants are mulattoes, some of whom have kinky hair still, but skins as light as ours. I noticed one small boy whose hair and skin were so like our own that if I had not been told, I should never have suspected his ancestry. He is nevertheless a slave for the rest of his life. And then at the website, they mentioned that at least 6% of Mount Vernon's enslaved population were described as mulattoes. Some of Washington's best known butlers, valets, waiters, ladies' maids, and even one black overseer were light-skinned black folk. And so this sets up a history. From the standpoint of history, this is quite a long-standing issue with very, very deep roots, not only in colonialism and slavery, but when getting to know people to even in the 21st century, on a personal level, we have this beast that flits in and out of our consciousness and goes back far longer than we might have given credit, at least heretofore. But it's about activism. And so I'd like to begin to wrap this up with your comments about the ways that we can be sure we don't perpetuate the negative and divisive implications of colorism within our own community. And again, this is open. This is a general question to our panelists.
So I'd like to comment on what you introduced, that it's in our history. It goes all the way back. Washington, even in terms of the slaves. I was thinking about that even before you said it, that the house slave was typically of lighter skin than the slave that was in the cotton field. And you asked about waving a magic wand. For me, in corporate America, whether it's in entertainment or any industry, look how many Black, dark-skinned CEOs do we have? Now, just look at how many Black CEOs do we have, and and in Fortune 500 companies, women of color that might be dark skin. So I think that tells the story there. Producers, people who own businesses that are making decisions to hire people of color. So until you set a magic wand, until that changes, until I can go for a job and I am lighter skin or darker skin, but it's based on my qualifications and credentials in terms of a pipeline to get a position. And I know I have an equal opportunity and chance, not just competing with the white people coming for the job or the Asian people coming for the job, but even the different colors of skin within my own race that might be applying for a position. Until it's fair across the board and people address their bias in terms of how they look at people, whether it's the hair, I can wear natural hair, or it's straight, or it's long, or it's short. I think we're going to continue to see the kinds of things that the doctor so eloquently she expressed. So for me, it's about fairness. It's about equal opportunity for people to be promoted, for people to be mentored, for people to be hired within the workplace, and having those conversations with the folks that are in charge so that they're aware of some of their biases. And I'll close with a quick story. In a particular company that I worked in, there was an African-American female natural hair that was hired. She was the only African-American in this particular department. And her manager would hold meetings. Because of how big the group had become, she couldn't sit with her peers, but she was sitting in a petition right behind her peers. And her manager would hold meetings and would not invite her to be a part of the conversation. And she was dark-skinned. When they hired a lighter skinned Asian woman, I saw that she was invited to the conversation, but the dark-skinned African-American woman was not. And we had to address that with her manager about why is she being left out. Her skills and what she's doing is no different from some of her peers. Why is she being treated differently? So until we can have those kinds of conversations, it's going to continue.
Thank you. Brother Spencer, would you like to add anything to what you've heard so far?
I would just like to echo everything Judy Ann had said. I think the first and most accessible step requires a transformation of consciousness. I know, especially for me as a lighter skinned person, it's a constant process of, interrogating the ways in which I react to other people. Who am I hanging out with? Why am I hanging out with them? Why, what patterns am I noticing amongst friend groups, amongst people I interact with, amongst romantic partners? And I think just turning that consciousness into direct action. So speaking up, for darker colleagues who aren't getting the same opportunities I may be, who are visible, who I witness and express discrimination, being able to use my privilege as a lighter skinned person, the friendly Negro, you can ask all your Negro questions or whatever, to confront racism head on. And because ultimately colorism is just, racism's grandchild. So ultimately that's what it is. Colorism is just, racism in some new shoes. It's the ultimate belief that Black is inferior, but because you've got some white in you, you're a little better, but you're still, as demonstrated in that quote, Washington's lightest slave was still a slave nonetheless. So ultimately it's about changing the ways in which we think, so that we can change the world around us and completely just dismantle, white supremacy and all of its vestiges whenever we feed it, wherever we meet it, be it in our minds or in the external world.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Asuji, comments, if you will?
Sure. So I was thinking about what Judy Ann said about how the courts are so behind in understanding and addressing colorism, that as we recognize that we live in more and more of a pigmentocratic society, right? One in which those with more power and the elites of our society are the palest people, and the ones who are the darkest in our society, regardless of racial categories, right? Irrespective of that, still tend to be on the lower rungs. That our court system has to do a better job of addressing these issues. And I think this will only come about through activism and through the legal system. But I was also thinking, like, from a personal level, that all of us as individuals should think carefully about who we date and whether the people who we date do they have to be lighter than us? Do they have to be darker than us? I remember Horton's powder maker wrote over 100 years ago about how Black women were in the South looked for Black men who were darker than them. Why? Because they didn't want to be called the N-word, because they wanted somebody who wasn't going to say hurl racial epithets at them in the, when they got angry, right? And then at the same time, we have other scholars like Drake and Caton talking about how, like, in early 1900s, how Black men had a preference for lighter skin. Everybody wanted a light sweetheart, they said. And so we have to think about who we're encouraging people to date, who are like, oh, she's so cute. Oh, don't date her, or don't date him, I don't know about him, right? Like we have to be mindful of those little comments that we make when we see people that we love date one another, or like people that we care about get married. That we want to make sure that skin color is not a part of our calculus for figuring out who the best mates are.
Thank you. Dr. Hill?
Yeah, I pretty much echo previous thoughts on this topic, but I do want to say I think we're going to naturally always have some degree of this issue. I really feel like things are going to get better, and it's going to take a little bit of everything we said, including it's going to take us having dialogue about this on a more regular basis. Obviously, parents need to have this conversation with their children. And I like what I'm seeing in the entertainment industry. We're getting more ownership power, and we're bringing to the table our own actors, our own stories. We're telling our story. The more other people tell our story and have the control, this is kind of what we get. So those are my thoughts on this. But I am encouraged with what I'm seeing over the past year with what's happening with our HBCUs, with our some of our elected leaders. There's a change taking place, and the more we educate and talk about this, the more productivity we're going to see.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hill. Ms. Sherry, do you have any comments you'd like to make before we head out of here?
Oh no, just thank you. This is a great lesson, and I'm glad to listen to other stories about colorism. So it was good to be on this panel with everyone.
Thank you. I have a final question. Hopefully Lisa and will forgive me on this, but I gotta ask one last thing, and that is to all panelists: will colorism impact in any way the selection of the newest member of the U.S. Supreme Court? Anyone want to comment on that? Will colorism, is it possible to see colorism at work in the selection of the person who will ultimately, we hope, become the first Black woman on the U.S. Supreme Court? Judy Ann?
So I'm almost afraid to comment because I think it's possible. I would hope not, but I would like to think it's based on credentials. I would like to think it's based on what the person brings to the table, because it's the highest court in the land and you're on it for life. But we live in a society where how we look and the color of our skin plays a role in terms of how we are perceived and being able to get a job. So I would say it's possible, but I'm hopeful.
Thank you. Anyone else before we go?
I don't think it will. I think this is a purely political move, and in a weird way, kind of like how when Obama was elected, a large critique of it was that, oh, he's not really Black, he's not really American. Thinking, at least strategically, if I were Joe Biden, you would probably want to get someone, obviously not nearly as light as me, so people, since especially now, inclusivity is such a currency, and speaking of colorism, how we're converting identity into something to be consumed. So I think the Democrats would probably choose someone who is visibly and recognizably Black to sort of skirt over their lackluster performance on race, expunging marijuana records, changing healthcare, sort of, instead of doing massive, tangible, beneficial things to Black people, they will instead, use this one Black person as, representative of some major transformation, when really it's still going to be the same sort of pigmentocratic government that we've been under for centuries. Thank you for that, Dr. Ozuji. It's a beautiful saying.
All right. Listen, thank you all. I want to turn this back over to Dr. Williams and to Lisa. I want to thank you, panelists, for your perspicacity and good humor. And Lisa and Dr. Williams, it's back to you.
Thank you, CR. And thank you to this incredible, I have pages of notes and I'm just overflowing with just information and nuggets that I hopefully will be able to share in other spaces as well. But I want to thank each of you, Spencer, Judy Ann, Dr. Hill, Dr. Ozuji, Cherie McCain, and CR, of course, for your time today, your thoughts, all of the nuggets of wisdom that you've shared with us. And we look forward to sharing this with the rest of our audience as we post it on our Facebook page, on our website, as well as on our other social media platforms. So with that, I would like to say thank you. Have a great afternoon, and we hope to see you again in the future. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Alicia. Thank you for
Fine,
the
thanks.
opportunity.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Nice meeting everyone.
Likewise.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.